Begin today the Gemara on Daf Memvav Amud Beis, last two lines in the bottom of the page. Omar Rabbi Lazar. Talk to Gemara. Omar Rabbi Lazar. Chatos sheshachta l'shem chulin. Korban chatos that one shechted, and he's thinking that he's doing it for the sake of just a regular animal that one shechts for himself. Ksheira. That machshava shalei lishma will not invalidate the korban. This is a point the Gemara brought before, that Rav said that we learn from the pasuk that only when you have a machshava by chatos for another korban, like an oila, it's the same within the category of kachim, then the wrong machshava of a different korban will passel. But if your machshava is for chulin, which is not related to a korban at all, that does not passel the korban. However, mishum chulin psula. If when you're shechting, it's not that you're thinking that I'm doing this for the sake of chulin. You actually are not aware of what kind of animal it is. You think that the animal that you're shechting right now is a chulin animal. You're making a mistake. You're not aware, b'chlal, where you are. It means the kohen standing in the azar in the Beis Hamikdash, but he's not aware where he is, and he's not aware what he's doing. He thinks that he's just shechting for himself an animal for his lunch.
And what's the other?
So in such a case, psula, it's going to be puzzle. Second, let me explain. And now the Gemara brings a source for this. This is something that Shmuel asked from Rav Huna. What's the source for this concept? And how did he ask this? From where do I know when it comes to kachim, you're shechting kachim, and you're sort of preoccupied with something else? That's what the word misasik means. You're thinking that you're doing something else. It's not a lack of kavana. Repeat that again. It's not a lack of your machshava. It doesn't just mean that you know you're shechting a korban and you're thinking that I'm not doing it l'shem this korban, I'm doing it l'shem chulin or l'shem another korban. No, you don't even know b'chal what you're doing. Your whole kavanah is not here. You think that you're shechting chulin. So how do I know that by kachim that will be a problem? Shenema, the pasuk says, v'shachat as ben habakar l'fnei Hashem. That you're shechting this ben habakar and it's l'fnei Hashem, which means ad shetei shchita l'shem ben bakar. You should be shechting it knowing what you're doing, that this is the ban, this is a korban l'fnei Hashem. If you're not realizing what you're doing in the action by shechting the korban, that's masasik. It's like you think you're doing something totally different, and therefore the whole korban is puzzle. Amalei. So Rav Huna asked on this, Zu b'yedenuhi. This pasuk that you just quoted, the shachal is ben habaka, that's in our hands. We know about this pasuk already. But the thing is that this pasuk is not enough of a source to say that the korban would be puzzle, because the rule regarding kachim always is that if the Torah says something once that has to be done by a korban, then that's the mitzvah. But it's not going to be ma'akiv. It's not a must that without this it's going to invalidate. So la'akiv minayin. Where do I have a source to say that this is a must, that if you are thinking that you're doing something totally different? So the Gemara is discussing here is that la'akiv minayin, from where do I know that this is a must, that you have to be aware of the action that you're doing in the korban? That through your will, meaning to your consciousness, you have to know what you're doing. That's how you shechted. That has to be with your conscious awareness of what exactly it is that you're doing. Otherwise, the korban will be totally puzzle. Places here points out that this expression the Gemara here says, misasik b'kachim, is a bit different than the lashon of misasik that it uses in other places. Usually, the concept of misasik applied over here would mean a kohen took a knife, threw it up in the air, and then the knife somehow landed on the throat of the animal and it shechted it properly. Meaning that he wasn't even intending to shecht b'chlal in the physical action. He was intending to throw. And the knife did the shechita without him even intending to do this action. Here we're talking about a different kind of misasik. He intended to do this action. He's intending to shecht. But he's not aware where in the world he is and what the animal is. He thinks that he's just in his backyard shechting a behemoth for his lunch. It's a different kind of misasik. And the Gemara here is saying that this as well is learned from the pasuk that it's going to be puzzled by a korban.
What does it mean the same chulin?
Yeah.
The same chulin. What does that mean?
Where is l'shem chulin? No, that's something else. L'shem chulin means that he knows it's a korban, but he's just thinking to himself, this, I know it's a korban, I know it's a chatas, but I'm shechting it for the sake of chulin. But he's aware, very aware what he's doing. Then there's mishum chulin. Mishum chulin means he has no idea what he's doing b'chlal. He thinks he's shechting a korban somewhere in his backyard.
So why should there be a difference?
It's not
if I know
No.
If
No,
I
no,
know
you
what it
can't.
is, I'm not doing it for what it is.
You can't make these Zevochim as.
I'm not making a Kavachim, I'm just making it's a sensible thing.
No. It doesn't work like that. If a person knows what he's doing, then it's
But
not
he's
Pesasik.
He's not doing
It's
it.
not.
He's not doing what he knows.
He is, yeah. He's thinking that it's going to be l'shem something else.
He has a carbon.
Masha Enkein over here, he doesn't know b'chlal what he's doing. It's not considered to be an action of a carbon. Okay, we got to go
Right.
weiter.
So I'm taking something I'm not
Sagt the
doing for what it
Gemara,
is.
she'eina machshave hoyleches ela achara ovid. So the Mishnah says that the reason that this is actually the opinion of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says you can't require a kohen to start thinking the 6 different things that the Mishnah mentioned when he shechts a carbon, for the right carbon, for the right owner, l'shem Hashem, reyach, nichayach. There's a whole list of things that the kohen has to be thinking, or maybe even verbalizing. So the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi says, Chachamim were mesakin that a person should not be thinking all of this, the kohen should not be thinking all of this, because then we're afraid that he's going to come to think the wrong thing. So therefore, the chatchila, he should shechted stam. Well, now what's the reason? Because it's only the kohen himself that his machshava matters for the carbon. She'ena machshava eleches ela achara ovid. Therefore, the kohen that's busy doing the aveda, and while he's doing it, he also has to think all these machshavas, so it could be confusing. He can make a mistake. But the owner of the carbon, his machshava is irrelevant for the kashrus of the carbon. That's what Rabbi Yossi is saying. Says the Gemara, Masnisa in the Loikai Tana. Our Mishnah does not agree to the opinion of this Tana here. The Tanya, because in the Braisa we learned, Omer Rabbi Loza Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Loza Rabbi Yossi says, Shamaiti Shabaylim Mefaglim. I heard that even the owner of the carbon, the kohen is doing the Aveda, and the kohen is not thinking anything. He's doing it, Rashi says, b'shtika. But the owner that's there, when the kohen is bringing the carbon, he's thinking the machshava of pigel, that this carbon is shechted, that it should be eaten out of its time. The thought of the owner will passel the carbon with the aveda that the kohen does. It's a huge chiddush.
Really?
Because, and now here Rashi says that this chiddush applies only when the kohen is doing it b'shtika. It's mashma from Rashi. If the kohen himself is actually having the proper thoughts for what this carbon is, then the thoughts of the owner will not affect it. But over here, in this case, where the kohen is doing it without any machshava, he's just bringing the carbon stam, b'shtika, and the owner that's there is thinking things that are pigel. The machshava of the owner will affect the aveda of the kohen. It's the action of the kohen. If you just have a machshava of pigel and you don't do the action of the aveda, there's no pigel. What makes the pigel is the action of the aveda of the kohen. So you need the action of the kohen in the aveda to make it pigel. But we combine the two. We combine the machshava of the owner to the action that the kohen is doing to make it pigel. That's Rabbi Loza Rabbi Yossi's chiddush. What's the source for this? Omar Rav, in my time the Rabbi Loza Rabbi Yossi, the Amakra, because the pasuk says regarding an owner that brings a carbon, v'hikriv ha-makriv. It refers to the owner of the carbon, that he is the makriv of the carbon, v'hikriv ha-makriv. Now, just like it says regarding the owner, this expression of makriv, in the pasuk where it speaks about pigel, Rashi here brings the pasuk of pigel. It says that hamakriv, where's the lashon of the pasuk? Hamakriv lo yachashiv. That when you bring the carbon and you have the machshava of pigel, it should not be considered a carbon. It should be pasul. So by the parsha of pigel, it uses this word hamakriv. And when it speaks about the owner of the carbon, it refers to him as the hamakriv, as the one that's bringing the carbon. So that shows that he has the status of hamakriv, even though he's not doing the actual aveda. He has the status of the hamakriv, and therefore his machshava has the power to passel the aveda that the kohen does. Amar Abaye, so Abaye says based on this, Rabbi Loza Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Kulu Sviri Luhu. All these 3 Tanoim, they all hold this same idea that Zemachashiv could have one person that's thinking something, and Vizeh Ovid, and someone else is doing the action, and Havya Machshava. And the Machshava, the thought of one, will affect the action of another person. Where do we see this? Rabbi Loza Rabbi Yossi Hadal Maran. Rabbi Loza Rabbi Yossi, as we just said. And Rabbi Eliezer, we see Rabbi Eliezer says this as well, the Tanan, because there's a Mishnah that says that Hashoichet Lo'iv Dikachavim, if a person, a person that shechs for a guy, that he's shechting this animal for a guy that serves Avodah Zarah, an idol worshipper, shchitasik sheira. The shchita will be kosher even though he's shechting it for the guy, and this is a guy that is thinking while you're shechting it for him that this shchita should be for Avodah Zarah. But what the guy is thinking The guy is thinking that it should be for avodah zarah. You're the one though that's shechting it, and you're not shechting it for avodah zarah. So then your action of the shechita will be kosher, even though the guy is thinking for avodah zarah. However, Rabbi Eliezer paisel. Rabbi Eliezer says that no, that it's going to be possible because we assume that the guy, an idol worshipper, when you're shechting it, he's thinking to himself that this shechita should be for the sake of avodah zarah. So even though it's the yid that's shechting it, and it's the guy that's thinking the thought of avodah zarah, the thought of the guy will affect the action that the yid does by shechting the carbon, and it becomes a puzzle because it's asaba no, it's been shechted for avodah zarah. So we see the same concept. A third place where we see this concept, Reb Shimon ben Elazar holds the same idea. The Tanan or the Tanya, we learned in the Braise, Klal Omar Reb Shimon ben Elazar. Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that it said the following rule, and this is regarding Shabbos. The issur of carrying out on Shabbos, in order to be chayiv, when you carry on Shabbos, it has to be something that is useful. It can't just be a tiny little speck of a dust. It has to be something that has a certain shear, or even shear is not always enough. It has to be something that people don't just discard. It has to be something that has some use to it. So therefore, Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, Kol she'ein kosher la'atzniya, if it's not something that people put away to use, she gives an example, dam nida. Dam nida is something that belongs in the garbage. So if a person carries that out, so it's not something that's usable at all. Or another case, ve'ei matzniyin kamayu, or even if it is something that could be useful, but it's such a tiny amount, the shear is too small, so people do not put it away to use in this small amount. So hochshar lezeh, if for one person, he decides that for him it is useful, even this tiny amount, he has a machshava, he has a certain use that he has of this tiny amount or of this thing that other people throw into the garbage. And v'etzniyah, and therefore he puts it away for himself. Now, uba acher, somebody else comes, v'yitziyah, and he takes it out on Shabbos, nischayiv zeh b'machshava shel zeh. Because for one person, he decided that for him this is significant, someone else comes and takes that item and carries it out, he's going to be chayiv. Even though it's not his machshava, it's only something which has significance for someone else. And now another person comes along and carries it out, the machshava of one person makes this item significant for someone else to be chayiv when you carry it out. So you see over here, all these three Tanaim hold of the very same concept that the machshava of one person affects the action of the other person.
Are both of them chayav?
No, of course not. Only the one that does the action is going to be the one that's chayav. Okay, but we see this idea by a carbon, by kachim. We see this by avodah zarah, and we see this regarding carrying out on Shabbos. Okay, so now the Gemara will explain, could we compare all these cases? Are they the same? It says the Gemara like this. Tarvayo, the two Tanaim that we brought here, that's Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Eliezer said it by avodah zarah, and Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar said it regarding Shabbos. Islu, the Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yasi. They would agree to what Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yasi said, that this applies by a carbon, because it's a kal v'chaimer. Hashta b'chotz, if when it comes outside. Meaning, not regarding kachim, regarding avodah zarah or regarding Shabbos. Amrinan, we say this point that the machshava of one person is so powerful that it could affect the action of another. Bifnem mibaye. So regarding the kachim that's inside the Beis Hamikdash, needless to say that they would agree that that's true, because when it comes to a carbon, bifnem, we see that machshava, it says in the Torah clearly, the concept of machshava, that the person's thoughts in relation to a carbon are very powerful. So if they say this regarding avodah zarah and Shabbos, where there is no pasuk in the Torah where we see that machshava has power in this way, so over there they say that still the machshava of one person affects the action of another, for sure they would agree that this is true regarding a carbon. However, Rabbi Elazar but Rabbi Yasi, less luhu the tarvayu. Rabbi Elazar but Rabbi Yasi that says this regarding a carbon, he doesn't agree to what they said regarding avodah zarah or Shabbos, because dilma b'fnim, what he said only applies to a carbon that's in the Beis Hamikdash. There, the Torah says machshava is very powerful. So hu damrina, that's where we say this idea. But b'chutz le'amrina, outside the Beis Hamikdash, regarding anything that's not a carbon, we don't apply this concept that one person's machshava could affect the action of another person. Okay, now the Gemara goes a step further. Between Shabbos and avodah zarah, these two, which one is there more of a svara that machshava has a power to affect the action of someone else? Says the Gemara, Rab Shimon ben Elazar islay de Rabbi Eliezer. Rab Shimon ben Elazar that was speaking about Shabbos, he would agree to what Rabbi Eliezer said regarding avodah zarah, because hash to b'Shabbos amrinon. If you say this idea regarding Shabbos, avodas kechavim mibayeh. So then, needless to say, that this would apply to avodah zarah as well, because as Rashi explains, Avodah Zarah, we find in the pasuk, is compared to a carbon. The halacha of Avodah Zarah is when one slaughters an animal for Avodah Zarah, it's going to become asar bahana, and that's only if it's something which is done similar to the way a carbon is shechted inside the Beis Hamikdash. It's learned from the pasuk, Zevech lalehim yachram bilti lashem levadai. If you shecht it for Avodah Zarah like it's shechted for a carbon, then it becomes asar. And that the chiddush of that is it doesn't matter if it's the way to serve this Avodah Zarah, it's not the way, it doesn't make a difference. If it's done like it's done in the Beis HaMikdash, it becomes Aser. So therefore over here, by Avodah Zarah, we see that the Torah compares the halacha of slaughtering for Avodah Zarah to what's done inside the Beis HaMikdash. So it's definitely logical to say that the machshava regarding Avodah Zarah has a strong power, similar to the way it does by a carbon. So therefore, if Rab Shimon ben Elazar says this regarding Shabbos, he definitely would hold that this would apply regarding Avodah Zarah. But on the other hand, Rabbi Eliezer, let's like the Rab Shimon ben Elazar. Rabbi Eliezer would not agree to the point that Rab Shimon ben Elazar says that this applies by Shabbos, by carrying on Shabbos as well. Because only by Avodah Zarah do I say that the machshava of one, of the guy, of the idol worshipper, affects the one that's slaughtering the animal, because we see by Avodah Zarah, the Torah compares it to a carbon in the Beis HaMikdash. Avol Shabbos, however, when it comes to Shabbos, meleches, machsheves, osra Torah. By Shabbos, the action of the malacha that the Torah says is forbidden is only an action that a person does calculated with his own machshava, that he is doing this action for a certain purpose, for a certain significance. If someone else has a machshava, but you have no significance in that and the action that you're doing in this malacha, so then it's not meleches machsheves. The action that you're doing is not significant for you. So therefore, by Shabbos, he wouldn't hold to this idea that someone else's machshava helps me. Rashi says that we learn it out, this concept of meleches machsheves, you learn out from Parshas Vayakel. In the beginning of Parshas Vayakel, it says the Isser of Shabbos, not to do malacha on Shabbos, and right afterwards it speaks about the building of the Mishkan. So just like the action that was done to build the Mishkan, it was all done meleches machsheves. Everything was calculated in how every action they're doing to build the Mishkan. So to on Shabbos, the action that you're chayav for is only something that is a purpose, calculated, something that you need. Someone else's machshava, though, will not affect the malacha that you do. Therefore, he disagrees with the point that Rab Shimon ben Elazar says.
So with the korban with the goy for avodah zorah,
it
can mishpia.
Yes, it affects the action.
So a yid can mishpia, the guy that's the owner of the korban. He can mishpia.
Correct.
People ask him. I mean, he's just offering the korban. They talk to him. They ask him. The goy's doing everything.
True, but he comes and says, "I had this machshava," or even if he says it verbally.
Tell him to shut up.
So it's going to pass all the carbon. Hadran aloch beishamai. We shall return to you to the fourth pedic of Masechta Zevochim, pedic beishamai. Okay, we begin the next pedic, which is the famous pedic Hezo Mekayman that we say every morning. And here, now you'll finally learn this pedic with the Gemara. So when you'll say it every morning, you'll know the meaning of every single detail. Let's see. What's the right place for the avodas that are done for the karbanis in the Beis Hamikdash? Kotche Kadoshim. So if it's in the category of Kotche Kadoshim, then Shchitasam Batzafen. The Shchita has to be done on the north of the Mizbeach. Now exactly what the north of the Mizbeach means, we had a few opinions about that before in the Gemara. It has to be literally on the north of the wall of the Mizbeach only, or it could be a little further in on the north, or maybe even further out in the Azara on the north, but it has to be definitely on the north section of the Azara. Okay, there's other details as well that have to be done on the north over there, as we'll see from the continuation of the Mishnah. You have to receive the blood when you shecht also on the north. The Mishnah skips that point there. The Gemara will explain why. Now, Par V'Sar Shel Yom HaKippurim, the bull and the goat that's brought on Yom Kippur, this is also Kotche Kadoshim, Shchitasam Batzofen, that's shechted on the north of the Mizbeach, and also the Kibbul Damam V'Chlishares Batzofen. Here the Mishnah spells out, and you receive the blood also there in a Klishares on the north side of the Mizbeach. Now, there's another point that the Mishnah wants to say here. No. On the north of the Mizbeach again. Batzofen, the Nitzofen of Dazara, north of the walls of the Mizbeach. There's another point that the Mishnah is saying here, that you must receive the blood in a Klishares. You can't receive it in your hands. It has to be a proper Klishares. And this is learned from what it says by the carbon that Eden brought by Matan Torah, Vayosem ba'agonos, that the blood was placed into bowls. And here we know by all karbanis that it has to be in a Klishares. And V'damanton, these karbanis on Yom Kippur, the bull and the goat that the Kohen Gadol brings, what do you do with this blood? Hazoyal ben abadim has to be brought inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and you spray the blood between the poles of the Orain against the Kapaides. Doesn't go onto the Kapaides, it goes onto the floor in between. And then you come out and you spray towards the Pareiches. In both of these cases, you spray Achas Lamaila, once above, and Sheva Lamata, and 7 below. And then Vala Mizbeach Hazov, and you also spray on the Mizbeach Hazov, come out, and as the Pasuk says, the details that you spray also on the inside Mizbeach. Now, regarding all these bloods that have to be sprayed inside, Matana Achas Mem Markovis. If you're missing even one, then it invalidates it. You have to do the whole thing over. Or you start from where you left off. We learned before, if the blood spills, then you start from where you left off. But you need to have each one of the hazahs done here properly. Shiyare done, then the leftovers of this blood, it's poured out on the western wall of the outside Mizbeach. And the reason why it's by the western wall, that's the wall of the Mizbeach where you have a foundation, a tefach of a foundation for the Mizbeach. Or an amma of a foundation. But if you did not pour the blood there, that will not invalidate the carbon. It's good. Okay, there was actually machlokes we had about this in the Masechta before here, but here the Mishnah says even if you don't pour the remaining blood from the carbon of Yom Kippur, it's going to be kosher. Now, then there's the bulls that, what do you do with the meat of this carbon? You don't eat it. There's parts that you burn in the Mizbeach, but then the meat is taken and is burnt outside. And also goats that are brought as a carbon chatas that are also burnt outside. This is karbanis. This is the par koyim Mashiach, par helm davashal tzibor. Certain karbanis chatas that they're burnt outside. Shchitas and batzofin. They're also shechted on the north of the Azara, the kibbul dama b'chlisharis batzofin, and you receive the blood there in the north as well. Now the bloods, what do you do with it? V'dom and ton hazoya al pareiches. You spray the bloods towards the pareiches, similar to what you do in Yom Kippur, but with one slight difference. By Yom Kippur, it's achas lamayla sheva lamata. Here it's just 7 times towards the pareiches. And then val mizbeach hazov. You also spray the blood on the gold mizbeach, on the inside mizbeach. And matona achas mehen ma'koves. One time missing of all these times that you have to spray the blood, we'll pass all this. And this we learned this in the previous Pedic, where the Gemara brought the pasuk. Rashi quotes it, "Va'asa kasher asa." There's a double time. The Torah says it twice to teach that any of the bloods that have to be sprayed inside the Beis Hamikdash, it has to be done all. Even one matane will hold back the kapara of this carbon. Shiyari Adam, then the leftovers of the blood is poured out in the western wall by where there's a foundation of the outside Mizbeach. Vim loy nasan, if you didn't spray the blood or pour the blood there, loy ikev, it doesn't hold back the kapara. Elu va'elu, now both that were mentioned here, the Param Anisrafim, Mesiram Anisrafim, and what was mentioned before, which is the Karbanis of Yom Kippur, that the Kohen Gadol brings, the Par and Sar of Yom Kippur, all of them that are burnt outside, the Srafin, they're burnt outside, Abeis HaDeshem. We are outside on the place where they used to bring the ashes of the Mizbeach. Right, so regarding the Karbanis of Yom Kippur, it clearly says in the Pasuk that you should take it out, you take it out and burn it outside. Exactly where it's burnt outside, that's learned from what it says here by the Param Anisrafim, Siram Anisrafim, by the Karban Chatas. It says that it should be burnt El Shefech HaDeshen. In the Beis HaMikdash, they used to remove the ashes of the Mizbeach on a daily basis, and they would put it on the side of the ramp of the Mizbeach, and it would stay there, it would disintegrate there. But then, once in a while, when the ashes on the Mizbeach was way too much, they had to take it out, and there was a place designated where they put the ashes there. It's that place where they would burn these karbanis chatas outside the machne as well.
If you have to spray it 7 times, and you missed 1 time, then the whole thing is...
So then the kapara is incomplete. Back to Gemara, V'nisni, in the beginning of the Mishnah. The first case, where it starts off, Kotche Kotchem, that all Kotche Kotchem should be shechted on the north. So, V'nisni nami v'kibul dama v'chlishares patzofim. Why doesn't it mention there this detail as well, that the receiving of the blood is also on the north? Like it says afterwards, when it says the details afterwards, it says that the blood has to be received on the north. Answers the Gemara, it doesn't, because there's an exception. Kivin de'eka asham mitzaire, because there's the carbon asham that a Mitzayre brings. The Kibbul Domai B'yad, that here the Kain receives the blood in his hand, not in a vessel. B'yadhu, in his hand, Shaire. So therefore, the Mishnah doesn't want to say, when it speaks generally about all Kotche Kotchim, it doesn't say that it has to be done in a vessel on the north of the Azara, because there's an exception to this. The Asham Mitzayre is in the hands. The Gemara, the Asham of the Mitzayda, do you not receive the blood in a vessel? But Vakatani Lo come on, there's the Mishnah later that says, Asham Nazir, Vasham Mitzayda, Shchitasam Batzofin, you shecht it on the north, and the Kibbul Dama Bichlisharis Batzofin. And you do receive it in a vessel, in a Klisharis on the north. So you see that it's the same, like the other Karbanis, in a vessel. So why does the Mishnah not just say this halacha, the Kibbul Dama Bichlisharis Batzofin, that applies to everything? As says the Gemara, Meikara Savar, in the beginning, when the Tana teaches the halacha of our Mishnah, he held that Kibbul Dama biyadhu, that the Kayan has to receive the blood of this Asham by the Mitzayda in his hands, and therefore Shaire. So therefore he leaves it out. He doesn't say the Kibbul Dama in a Keli because there's an exception, because this blood has to be received in the hand. But then the kiven, the loisagile ela bekeli. But since then there's additionally another detail that you also have to receive it in a keli as well. So hadar tanye. So therefore he says it later regarding the halacha of the when he speaks specifically about the asham mitzayda. There he mentions it. What's the point the Gemara is saying? If you read the Gemara superficially, it sounds like the Gemara is saying that first he held one thing, then he retracted his opinion, and he held something else. No. The point the Gemara is saying here is, as we'll see, the Gemara will prove that when it comes to this Asher Mitzayda, there's actually two bloods. There's bloods that the Kayan has to receive in his hands, and there's the blood that the Kayan has to receive in the Keli. So there's two different bloods. So therefore, in our Mishnah, it's not mentioning that it has to be received in the Keli, because then you'll miss this idea that this is different, that it has to be received in the hand. Well, then later, when it speaks about the Hashem Mitzayda, it also mentions the detail that it does have to be received in the Keli. And both are true. Where do we see that both are true?
First that happens in the Keli.
Oh, let's see. So the Gemara says, so the Tanya, as we learned in the Braisa, what does it say by the Mitzayda, by the bloods of the Mitzayda? V'lokach, that he takes from that blood, and this pasuk it says, the Kayan takes from this blood of this Asham, and what does he do with it? He places it on the right ear of the Mitzayda. Okay, so now, Yachal B'Keli, I would think that this blood, the Kayan is holding in a vessel. Talmud Laima, in that pasuk it says, V'lokach, he takes the blood, and V'nasan, and he places it on the ear of the Mitzayda. So now, man is seen about Meshal Kayin, just like when he places the blood on the ear of the Mitzayda, it's not spraying it from the vessel. He dips his finger inside. The Kayin does it with his finger, and he puts it on the ear of the Mitzayda. Af lekiche. So when it says V'lokach, it also means Ba'atz Meshal Kayin, that the Kayin receives the blood in his hand, and then with a finger he places it on the Mitzayda. So I see here that by this carbon, it's unique that you receive the carbon in the hands. Yeah. But now the Braisa goes on to say, Yochel Afle Mizbeach Kain. I would think that this is the same also regarding the Mizbeach, meaning the bloods of the Mitzayda, besides the bloods that are placed on the body, on the ear of the Mitzayda, there's also the bloods of this carbon that's spread in the Mizbeach. So I would think that with that blood that has to be spread in the Mizbeach, it's the same thing that you take it from the blood in the hand of the Kain to spray in the Mizbeach. Talmud Laima, but no, it says in the pasuk, Ki kachatas Asham. We compare the chatas and the asham, and huma chatas, just like the chatas to a keli, the blood is received in a vessel, af asham ton keli. So to the asham has to be only in a vessel. So therefore, what comes out? So you learn from here that what's the story with the bloods of the carbon asham by the mitzayda? Both, they do two things. Asham mitzayda, shnei kainim mekablim esdamei. There are two kainim that receive its blood. Echad biyad. One kain receives the blood in his hand, and from that you're going to place in the body of the mitzayda, on his ears and so on. Ve'echad bekli, and another kain receives the blood in a vessel. Zeh shekivla bekli balei etzem mizbeach. First, sounds like the Mishnah is saying, first the kain receives with the blood in the keli, and then he comes balei etzem mizbeach. He comes to the mizbeach to spray in the mizbeach. And v'zeh shekivla biyad, and then the kain that receives in the hand balei etzem mitzayda. He then comes and takes from his hands with his finger and places it on the ear of the mitzayda. So the Mishnah here omits the keli, so that you should understand that there's an exception. The Asher Mitzayda you receive in the hand, but the Mishnah later, though, when he speaks about the Asher Mitzayda, does mention the keli by the Mitzayda, because there's also a keli there. So therefore, both of these Mishnayos are true. It's not a contradiction.
Yeah.